I fell asleep human. That's not poetry or metaphor. It's a technical description stamped onto the incident report that still exists somewhere in the Interstellar Transit Authority archives, probably misfiled under cryogenic anomalies or unexpected survivals. I know because I've seen a redacted copy of it. My name was there. My age, 27. Occupation, systems maintenance contractor. Status at time of incident, alive. Unremarkable, human. When I closed my eyes, the ship lights were flickering. When I opened them again, 20 years had passed, and an alien woman was waiting for me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I wasn't supposed to be in cryosleep. The Ardent Veil was a civilian cargo hauler, old enough that its hull plating had scars from micrometeorite impacts back when humanity still thought warp corridors were theoretical. I worked maintenance because it paid well and didn't require a prestigious academy badge. Fix what breaks, don't ask questions, don't die in deep space. That was the deal. We weren't carrying passengers, just crates, medical nanofabricators bound for a frontier colony near the Oran Reach. I was 3 months into a 6-month contract, bored enough to name the pipes in Deck C and talk to the diagnostic AI like it was a bored coworker. The malfunction started small. A temperature fluctuation in Cryo Bay 2, which shouldn't have mattered because Cryo Bay 2 is empty. I went down there because protocol said I should and because I was the kind of person who followed protocol even when no one was watching. The bay lights flickered as I stepped inside, casting the cryopods in a sterile blue glow. All empty. All quiet. Except one pod. It was open. That alone would have been strange, but what made my stomach tighten was the thin frost creeping along its edges, like it had recently been active. Cryosystems don't just wake up. They're scheduled, monitored, and triple-locked. I leaned in, frowning, and that's when the floor lurched. Alarm screamed. Red lights replaced blue. The ship shuddered so hard I was thrown forward, my shoulders slamming into the open pod. Pain flared, then cold, an unnatural, bone-deep cold that spread faster than panic. I remember shouting. I remember trying to pull myself free. I remember the pod sealing with a hiss that sounded like a hell breath being released. And then, nothing. No dreams. No darkness. Just a clean, surgical absence of time. Waking up felt like being assembled. Sensation returned in pieces. Pressure in my chest. A distant ringing. The ache of muscles that hadn't moved in far too long. My lungs burned as if I'd been holding my breath for years, and when air finally forced its way in, I coughed so violently my ribs protested. The pod hissed open. Light poured in, warmer than I remembered. Gold-tinged, not the sterile white of the Ardent Veil. My vision swam, struggling to focus, and when it did, the first thing I saw was a face that made my brain stall. She wasn't human. That was my first coherent thought. Her skin shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water, shifting between soft lavender and pale silver, depending on how the light hit her. Her eyes were too large, almond-shaped, irises a deep, luminous blue that seemed to glow from within. Delicate ridges traced her cheekbones, elegant rather than grotesque, and fine strands of white-silver hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She was smiling at me. Relief flooded her expression so intensely it almost hurt to see. Her shoulders sagged, as if she'd been holding tension for a very long time, and she whispered something in a language I didn't understand. I tried to sit up. That was a mistake. My muscles screamed in protest, and I collapsed back against the pod's padding with a groan. The alien woman reacted instantly, hands hovering over me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from her palms. "Easy," she said. Her voice was accented but clear. Human clear. I blinked at her. You speak English. She let out a soft, breathy laugh, the sound trembling with emotion. I have practiced it for many years. Years. The word echoed in my foggy mind. Where am I? Her smile softened. Something like awe crossed her features, as if she couldn't quite believe I was real. You're safe, she said. And you are very far from where you fell asleep. They told me later that I screamed when I learned the truth. Not immediately. Shock numbed me at first, wrapped everything in cotton. I accepted water fed to me through a flexible tube, accepted the gentle prodding of medical instruments that looked half-grown, half-manufactured. Accepted gravity that felt subtly different, lighter somehow. It wasn't until they showed me a date that something inside me broke. 20 years. The Ardent Veil had been lost with all hands. Written off as a warp corridor collapse, a tragedy folded into statistics and memorial plaques. My family, what little I had mourned me, moved on, aged. Some were dead. Others were strangers now. I lay in a recovery chamber, staring at a ceiling etched with unfamiliar constellations, and laughed until my throat hurt. The alien woman was there every day. She introduced herself as Salith. She was part of the Kavari, a species humanity had only recently made formal contact with. Recently, for them. For me, it was history I'd slept through. The Kavari were explorers, historians, and, when necessary, salvagers. They had found the remains of the Ardent Veil drifting near a dead warp eddy, half-fused with exotic radiation. Most of the ship was unsalvageable, most of the crew gone. My pod, however, had been sealed at the precise moment the warp corridor collapsed. The malfunction that wasn't supposed to matter had triggered an emergency cryo response, locking me in stasis at the edge of time. Salith had been the one to find me. I was not supposed to open that section, she admitted one day, sitting beside my recovery bed. The radiation levels were unkind, but the scans showed something impossible. A human life sign. Still stable. Still waiting. Waiting for what? I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine. For now. Rehabilitation was slow and humiliating. My body had survived, but it hadn't lived. Muscles had atrophied. Reflexes dulled. I had to relearn how to trust my legs, how to move without dizziness dragging me back down. The Kavari medical staff were endlessly patient, guiding me through exercises that felt absurdly basic. Salith watched whenever she could. Sometimes she talked about the ship, about her people, about the stars beyond the viewport that curved along the rehabilitation wing. Other times she just sat in comfortable silence, her presence grounding. One evening, after I'd finally managed to walk unassisted from one end of the room to the other, I collapsed into a chair, exhausted and triumphant. She clapped her hands together softly. You improve quickly. 20 years of rest, I joked weakly. Guess I had energy saved up. Her smile faltered. I noticed. What? She hesitated, fingers interlacing in her lap. For you, it was rest. For me, it was time. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. You've mentioned that before. Yes. She took a breath. I was young when we found you, barely assigned to my first deep salvage mission. My mentors told me not to become attached. Humans, they said, are fleeting. I swallowed. And you didn't listen. Her eyes shimmered. No, she told me everything then. How the discovery of a perfectly preserved human in an ancient wreck had caused a quiet uproar among the Kavari scientific circles. How debates raged about whether waking me would be ethical, safe, or politically wise. How time passed, years of study, cautious planning, waiting for the right moment. And through it all, Salith visited my pod. I learned your language from archived broadcasts, she said softly. I learned your history, your art, your foolish jokes, and your sad songs. I watched your species change while you slept. I pictured her there, alone with my frozen body, whispering words I couldn't hear. The thought was strangely intimate and unbearably heavy. You waited 20 years, I said. Why? Her gaze didn't waver. Because when I looked at you, I saw a bridge. A reminder that time does not erase meaning. And because she paused, the faint glow of her skin brightening. Because I wanted to know who you would be when you woke up. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken things. I finally asked the question that had been burning in me since the moment I opened my eyes. And if I hadn't woken up? Salith smiled sadly. Then I would have remembered you. The day I was declared medically stable, they gave me choices. I could return to human space, what remained of my connections there. The Kavari would arrange transport, provide compensation, even help me integrate into a society that had aged without me. Or I could stay. No pressure, they said. No obligation. Just an option. I stood by the viewport that night, watching unfamiliar stars drift past, feeling more untethered than I ever had on the Arden Vale. Humanity felt distant now, like a story I'd once read but couldn't quite recall the ending to. Salith joined me, her reflection overlapping mine in the glass. What will you do? She asked. I thought of empty apartments, of names on memorial walls, of a life that had moved on without me. Then I thought of a young alien engineer who had waited 2 decades beside a silent pod, believing that some things were worth patience. I don't know, I admitted. But I know this doesn't feel like an ending. Her smile this time was radiant. Then perhaps it is a beginning. It's been 6 months since I woke up. I still stumble over Kavari customs. I still miss coffee the way Earth used to make it. Some nights, the weight of everything I've lost presses down so hard it's difficult to breathe. But I'm not alone. Salith and I walk the long corridors of the station together, trading stories, mine from a past she never lived, hers from a present I'm still learning to understand. We argue, we laugh, we stand side by side staring out at the endless dark, imagining futures neither of us planned for. I fell asleep human. I woke up something else. Not alien. Not entirely displaced. Just someone given a second chance, 20 years late, and met by a woman who believed waiting was an act of hope. And for the first time since I opened my eyes, that feels like enough. The decision didn't come all at once. For weeks after I was cleared, I told myself I was only staying temporarily. Long enough to recover fully. Long enough to learn how to exist in this century that had quietly replaced my own. Long enough to stop feeling like a ghost haunting other people's futures. But time has a way of revealing truth when you stop fighting it. I began working again, not as a maintenance grunt crawling through forgotten ducks, but as a consultant. Human technology from my era was considered archaic now, but that made it valuable. I explained design philosophies, human redundancies, the strange habits of engineers who never expected aliens to study their work. The Kavari listened. They valued it. So did Salith. She showed me places not marked on official station maps, quiet observation decks where ancient star routes glimmered like silver scars across space, cultural chambers where Kavari elders sang histories that were encoded as light rather than sound. She explained concepts humans never evolved words for, emotional states tied to stellar cycles, bonds formed not by blood or time, but by shared waiting. One evening, as we stood beneath a slowly rotating hologram of the galaxy, she asked me something that made my breath catch. In your species, she said carefully, what do you call the feeling of choosing someone, even when logic advises against it? I didn't answer right away. because I knew the word, and I knew the weight of it. Love, I said. She nodded slowly, as if confirming a hypothesis she'd carried for years. Then, I believe that is what I have been doing. The honesty of it hit harder than any dramatic confession ever could. No grand declarations. No urgency. Just a truth that had been quietly growing while I slept, while she waited, while the universe kept moving forward without me. I can't give you what you waited for, I said finally. I'm not the person you imagined. I'm older inside. I'm fractured. I lost 20 years I can never get back. Salith stepped closer, her hand hovering near mine. I did not wait for who you were, she said gently. I waited for who you would become. I took her hand. That was the moment I stopped thinking in terms of returning. Months passed. News from human space arrived sporadically. Familiar star systems now hosted joint colonies. Earth had changed governments twice. Entire cultural movements had risen and faded while I was frozen in silence. I felt sadness, yes, but not regret. Because grief, I learned, doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It just means you loved something that mattered. The Kavari eventually offered me permanent residency. Not as a curiosity, not as a relic, but as a citizen. I signed the documents with a hand that didn't shake. The ceremony was simple. Light-based insignia formed briefly over my wrist, then faded into my skin. Non-invasive, reversible, symbolic more than anything. Salith stood beside me, her expression unreadable until it wasn't. Afterward, as the station lights dimmed to simulate night, we stood together at the viewport where my journey had truly restarted. Do you ever wish, I asked quietly, that you hadn't found me? She turned, surprised, then smiled in that soft, luminous way that still disarmed me. No, she said, because then I would not know what patience could become. I watched the stars drift by, ancient, indifferent, endlessly moving. Once, I had been afraid of time. Now I understood it wasn't something that only took things away. Sometimes it brought them to you. Late. Unexpected. Perfectly imperfect. I fell asleep human. I woke up 20 years later to a universe that had changed without apology, and an alien woman who had believed, against reason, against probability, that waiting could still mean something. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to catch up with time. I was walking forward with it. Together.